Hi,
How you doing?
I'm good. Give me 1 second. I gotta turn my audio up.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well. Yep. Perfect. How
How
are
you
you?
doing?
Oh, I'm well. I'm a little sick and under the weather, but
Oh, sorry to hear that.
it's all good. It's a sinus infection. Me living up north is completely new to me, so temperature change just like affects my sinuses and it just becomes a
Right.
but
Whereabouts are you?
I'm located in Portland, Oregon.
Oh, okay, very nice. Yeah, I've not ventured up there that yet, but I'd like to someday. I've heard a lot of nice things about it.
It's a
So
very beautiful area. It really is. Yeah. But I'm
great.
so excited you're doing this with me today. Suzanne has told me so much about you. And I've actually, since knowing of you, I've been keeping track of just your trajectory as an actor. And I've found it fascinating that you actually started off as a video games artist. And
Yeah, that's right.
yeah, so I mean, could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's so cool that for a lot of people who are in this industry, some folks don't just start off as actors, especially at a young age. They have careers, they have lives that come before it, and then they make that change. And I think a lot of folks don't allow themselves to see the normalcy in changing careers. So, especially to change your career into being an actor. So, could you talk a little bit about that transition and what it was like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just one thing I'll say is that I still do work in video games, but there was a period where I was sort of just doing freelance in between. But yeah, to give you the story of that, when I was 16 years old, I'd already been playing video games. I was a very geeky kid. I still am, since I was 11 years old. And there was a club that was across the road, literally just across from where our house was, that where you could bring your computers in, your games, meet people, other teenagers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I had a friend that went there and I made a few more friends once I started sort of getting to know people. And one day, instead of just sort of playing games and sort of chatting to people, I decided to bring in some of my artwork because since I was 11, when I first got into computers, I dabbled with the idea of doing digital art. And back then, when I was 11 years old, digital art was typed in binary. I mean, you had to program the art.
Yeah.
There was a paint program. I didn't have it. It was too much money at the time. So, but yeah, so I showed some of my artwork there. I had mock video game screens. Like, I was really into sort of sci-fi shooters and stuff. So I'd sort of make screens of like made up games and things and try my sort of hand at what that would look like. And one particular thing that I did, which seems a little sort of random now, but it was kind of apt in the day because this was 1988,
Yeah.
was I was and still am a Madonna fan. And I had hand painted the True Blue album cover that Madonna had on her cassette, and eventually
Oh,
years later, with her with the Marilyn Monroe hair and the leather jacket off the shoulders, sort of doing that pose. And I
yeah.
thought it was just a striking image. So for some reason, I decided at the age of 15, 16 to hand paint it. And a guy came up to me in the club and he said, "Oh, did you paint that?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Do you have anything else?" And I showed him some other stuff. And he said, "Do you want a job?" I was like, "I don't know. I work at Safeways, behind the register." It's like, I don't know. He said, "Sure, it sounds cool." He says, "We're starting up a new company." So I went back and told my mum, and she thought it sounded exciting because she knew I like games. She knew I was into art, into painting and drawing and everything else.
Yeah.
So my dad, however, was a bit unsure about it because he wasn't sure the sort of state of the gaming industry at the time because it was going through a bit of a lull. I
Right.
wasn't sure if it was going to make it past another couple of years and thought it was a fad, but that definitely didn't happen. So yeah, so that's how I got into it. I actually had to start the following year though because my mother said I should finish my exams and then I could start when I was 17 the following year. So that's when I
Mm.
started. So I've been doing it for 33 years now, and it was a fascinating. It has still is a fascinating career. But the transition to your question, I moved to the States in 2002. I've been
Yeah.
here 20. I mean, I'm from London originally.
Mhm.
And a couple of friends of mine that I'd worked with at a company back in England in the late 90s had gone off to work for Sony PlayStation in San Francisco. So they went abroad, to work in San Francisco. That studio split into San Francisco and San Diego.
Yeah.
And they were now down in San Diego. They said, you should come visit us. So I came over to visit them, and they said, well, actually, there's a job going here if you want to check it out. There's an interview that's up. So I did that. And I took the job, and I moved to the States 9 years later, but I wasn't an actor at the time. So I actually started acting in the States. I had really done nothing in the UK except for a couple of nativity plays as a little kid.
Yeah.
So the way I fell into that was I was laid off with the Great Recession, end of 2008. They let go of half the people from Sony across all the divisions.
Oh, wow.
And I was one of them. And about 4 months into being laid off, I had money from severance and everything, but I was thinking, well, looking for jobs. Is there anything I can do to sort of, I've got this time to myself, anything I want to do, because it's 20 years since I've had a break in games. So I thought, I always wanted to try an acting class. So I found one. I Googled it. I didn't even know what SAG-AFTRA was. Like, what is SAG-AFTRA? What are acting classes? What kind of things are they? What's out there?
Mm-hmm.
And then I found one that was literally right around the corner from Sony where I got laid off, which was really weird. Mm-hmm. And I called them and booked to audit the class, to sort of sit in at the back and just sort of watch it and see if I liked it,
Yeah.
So I went down there, went up the elevator, went down this dark, gloomy corridor to this little door that sort of said, acting class, thing. And I put my hand on the door handle and I thought, what am I doing? This is crazy. I'm at the time 36 years old. And I thought, this is nuts. This is silly. And I turned around, I left, I didn't go in. I went down the elevator, I drove off for about half a mile.
Oh, wow.
And then I stopped and I thought, no, hold on, Scott, you're always the person who checks everything out. You're always open-minded, you're always like looking into things. Go back, check it out. So that was the turning point. I wouldn't have met you, I wouldn't have done all the things, I wouldn't have met Suzanne, all these great things. Yeah. So I started doing a class there, and very first class, I thought I was just going to watch. And they're like, Scott, come down and try this scene. And I was like, no.
Yeah, they always do that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know. But everyone turned around and was like, come on, give it a try. It's fun. Don't worry about it. And they had cameras as well. It was a on-camera class,
Oh, goodness. Yeah.
So I went down and did it. I remember the page shaking, the sweat dripping. It was just like a mess, but there was something fun about it. And then after about 2 or 3 weeks, I started sort of getting a little bit of a feel for what it was and what you could do with it and how creative it was and how sort of raw it is, because you're not sort of just pushing pixels on a screen or playing keys on an organ or piano to create music. You're actually doing something within yourself as a human being, which is a very sort of direct thing as opposed to sort of a translation of something onto something else,
Right.
I found it fascinating. So that's how I got into the very beginnings of doing it 13 years ago.
That is amazing. So one of the things I find fascinating about acting, like you said, is this like direct work within self. It's very human. And I don't think we often give ourselves time to be human, because we're very much in this like mode of operating, especially in America. And so when I started doing acting courses myself, I was like, okay, I'm going to read all the books and I'm going to just technically and systematically try and understand this process. And then I get to a class and I'm like, okay, I mean, the books were great, but now I got to dive right in. So when you were in your first like a couple classes with the acting studio, doing what you needed to do to tap into something that we honestly, naturally, and ironically, as human beings, don't do often enough. There is a mode of self-reflection that comes with acting. And there's a philosophy to acting that, that's why you see so many books like the Meisner technique and Uta Hagen and things like that. Do you follow any of those specific techniques for yourself, or have you found that it's been an amalgamation of things that you've created just for you?
Very good question. I've had sort of varying conflicts throughout the years where when I first started doing acting classes at this particular class that I was mentioning, there was no sort of real mention of their techniques, who they were following. It was sort of like this is sort of a smorgasbord of things, right? And it wasn't like sort of super deep, at least in the classes that I was there for, super deep into sort of techniques. It was more about sort of just, you know, the technical techniques, like, making sure you know where to stand, and sort of thinking about, projecting, and or sort of bringing the conversation in closer. It was very sort of like technical stuff about how to work in front of a camera.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, what I have found that I lean towards best, I think, is Meisner, because I have a very strong imagination. I think that comes from just me, and that's why games happened, and
Yeah.
also games continues that imagination, right? You're
Yeah.
still sort of creating fantastical things and making stuff out of nothing.
Mhm.
So I still have that strong of an imagination today, and I find that just imagining what is going on in the scene and your relationship and the actual, what is actually happening. Like, is this your wife dying in your arms? I've never been married and I've never had a wife die in my arms, but I imagine it, as opposed to using substitution and sort of digging things up and sort of,
Yeah.
maybe feeling a little sort of rough afterwards because you've dug up real stuff.
Yeah.
I don't like that. That feels indirect to me, but I can totally understand why that works for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
that I personally prefer to sort of go directly into what is actually happening and feel that. And if I can't feel it, I need to work on it.
Yeah.
Um, but having said that, I do own a lot of acting books. Not all of them I've read yet. I think a part of me is a little fearful for reading a lot of different methodologies and a lot of different sort of constructs of how to be an actor, and then becoming too mechanical and losing what is working for me. But on the flip side of that, you're always looking to improve. When you work on some auditions and you think, well, I thought that was quite good, and then nothing comes back from it, you
Yeah.
sort of think, all right, maybe I should start reading some of those books, because what you need to do, I think personally, is you need to go into any of these books, any of these classes,
Mhm.
and just take what you need from them, because I don't think every single thing is going to be absolutely connecting with you as to how you work or how you want to work.
Right.
I think that, if in a given class they offer you, 10, 12, 15 different sort of interesting little sort of, pieces of advice, or ways of working, or sort of techniques, in the classes that I've been to, I've always found that I sort of walk away and sort of hold on to two or three of those.
Yeah.
It's the rest is sort of there on the back burner.
Yeah.
I don't want to overcomplicate things. You've already got enough things to think about with your lines, your position, your marking, you're sort of coming in on time, and the reactionary stuff, and
Yeah.
not blocking the light of the other actor, and making sure you sort of give eye contact, and all these kind of things you have to do.
Yeah.
And obviously taking on notes from the director of, like, we're now on the third or fourth set of notes for the scene. They've got to apply all of them plus all the other stuff. But I know actors that do, they will fill out on the script just
Mhm.
dozens, hundreds of little notes of, like, connect this subtext to that, this, and
Mhm.
it's I think it's great. It's what works for you. For me,
Yeah.
I like to sort of leave a bit of room to breathe and let it happen.
That's really great. And speaking to, the projects that you've worked on in the past, you've played Oliver, right, in Lodge 49. And you've actually, worked alongside so many actors since you started professionally. Has there been a specific role or, a specific project that really just for you made you feel like this is exactly what I'm meant to be doing? It was a confirmation that this was it, that all the hard work you put in what led up to this moment.
Yeah, funny enough, I think it is Lodge 49. I mean, there's a lot of films and sort of web series, and all sorts of things I've done in the past that I really, really enjoyed and connected with. Um, Hypochondriac is one of them, but it's such an unusual role,
I was
playing
actually
sort
going
of,
to ask you about hypochondriac, so we're
yeah,
gonna.
we'll get onto that one because that's a whole other conversation. That's a very strange role and
Yeah.
fascinating. But to answer your question, I think Lodge 49, because, you know, when I booked Lodge 49, I had been acting for 10 years. And ironically, it sort of hit me with that whole, like, 10-year thing that people talk about, putting in 10
Yes.
years worth of effort, right? And I've been in LA since 2011, minus 1 year because I lived for a year in Vegas.
Hmm.
But for the most part, in LA, and I found it incredibly hard to even get auditions for network shows in LA
Mm.
because that catch-22 of you need network show credits to get network show auditions, right?
Right.
And it is quite true. Now, having said that, I do know people that have gotten those and not had those credits because something about them or who they were connected, right place, right time, that kind of stuff. What people are looking for, diversity, unique skill set, that kind of thing. There's so many different factors. That's why you can never compare yourself as an actor to somebody else.
Right.
But because we all have our own journey as to how this works for us. But Lodge 49, because I remember when I booked it, obviously I was ecstatic. I mean, when I got the email, I just was jumping up and down like a crazy thing. I was so excited. I'd auditioned for the show for the previous season, for season one, for one of
Yeah.
the main characters, one of the guest recurring characters.
Yeah.
And but because it was season one, on the first audition I did for that, I had no idea what the show looked like because it didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
And I didn't get that. And then when season one came out, I saw the actor who played that role, who is very, very well established and talented actor, has tons of credits, tons of
Yeah.
amazing work, who I did meet when I did my role. And when I saw it, it was completely different to what I'd done for the audition. It
Mm.
was when I look back at the audition, I was like, oh wow, I took that in a completely different way,
Right.
because the
Yeah.
show's very, very quirky. And I took it sort of way more seriously.
Mm.
And oversimplifying things, but you know what I mean. But when I got the booking for the season two role that I did as Oliver, I was working at a games company where I still work. Had to go to my boss and say, "Hey, I booked a little thing. Can I have some time off?" And he was like, "Yep, absolutely, no worries." Yeah, I told him what it was, and it was a Paul Giamatti show with Wyatt Russell and all these great people in it. And I flew out there, and I think I got there like 2.5 days early just to be sure in case there were cancellations or they moved it up a day or something, like flight cancellations, or moved it up the shoot up a day. And then I was in my trailer going through, like, filling out the paperwork and just kind of going over the lines again and just kind of getting a feel for what I'm doing. And then we had lunch before I shot my scene. And I bumped into an old friend of mine who I'd met many years ago, Pollyanna McIntosh, who's on The Walking Dead.
Hmm.
And she happened to have a really nice part in Lodge 49. And I met the director. She was walking along with her, Alethea Jones. And we got to chat a little bit before we did the role, which was nice. It sort of broke the ice and sort of gave us a feeling of like what the vibe is of the set. And it was extremely warm, extremely inviting, extremely creative, extremely fun. And everyone was just sweethearts, absolute sweethearts. I'm really not buttering this up.
Yeah.
When I did my scene and it was all done, we got everything we needed, I was just sort of full of joy because it was so exciting.
Yeah.
And I walked up to the director and I said, "Thank you so much." And we both hugged like that. "Thank you so much. It was so great." And then I went back to the trailer, got my stuff, got in the car. And I know this sounds a little too much, but it's actually what happened. When I
Yeah.
drove back to the hotel, I had happy tears. I was overjoyed because I had, at that point, I think, done something like, 14, 1,500 auditions,
Yeah.
for things, and 10 years of work, never stopping. I never had a year off or a month
Yeah.
off even. And I finally got one. And it was not just I got a network credit. It was I got a beautiful, wonderful experience on a beautiful, wonderful show.
Right.
And it was more than I could have ever hoped for,
Exactly.
really.
Because I can only imagine that, not every set is like that, where, you know, everyone is coming together, not as just crew and actors, but as people who can trust each other through the process. And that in and of itself is a risk to take because you're putting together something that is, unmeasured. Like we can't even, as people who aren't in the industry, conceptualize the arduous process that is involved in creating television and film. So there's a lot of trust you need to lend to one another and belief in one another. So I can only imagine getting a role like Lodge 49 and then also knowing as soon as you got to set that this was a set full of people that cared about the
Yeah.
project, about each other. And I think that's phenomenal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it went from sort of like, the usual nerves of like the pressure of like, oh, I'm doing this now, I have to do this right, I have to make sure I do a good job and carry through what they liked about the audition, into the actual show itself. But then getting there and everyone's incredibly warm and sweet and friendly, and you could tell they're sort of, it sort of had that vibe of the set. And I'm not saying this is what they think, but they had that vibe to me of people probably every now and again thinking, I'm actually getting paid to do this. This is crazy. This is so much fun. And this is my day job. This is crazy. That was the vibe I got. And I felt incredibly welcome. There wasn't sort of like, oh, you're a co-star, you're just a small part, kind of
Right.
do your thing and go, it was nothing like that. It was incredibly nice. And I forever cherish it. It was a wonderful experience. I just wish the show had continued on because it was an amazing little show, very, very unique, very quirky, very fun and strange. And it was telling a really wonderful story about the human condition.
Yeah.
And it was just not mainstream enough. It
Yeah.
was hard to quantify into a trailer or a description.
Right. Right. And speaking of things that are just about the human condition, when you worked on Hypochondriac, what was that process like? How did you get onto the project? And
Yeah.
filming horror and thriller is so vastly different than, a dark comedy of sorts. So how did that work for you as an actor?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. Back in 2017, I think it was, I did a film called Campus.
Mm,
And I'd worked on another horror movie called Holy Terror with some great people, still friends of mine. One of the VFX guy on it, Robert Bravo, who's a good friend of mine, he was on that and he got into this new film, The Campus, and said, Scott, we're looking for actors to play parts of these sort of supernatural characters. They're wearing a mask, so you can't see the face, but you're still a human, but you're sort of summoned by the devil. You're sort of chasing this girl and you need to take her soul kind of thing. I thought, that sounds fun. That sounds different.
yeah.
So I went and did that. And I remember this one scene. This is what leads on to Hypochondriac. This one scene that I did on the campus where it was like they were setting up outside. It's like, okay, you're chasing the girl, you're pursuing her with this other, supernatural guy with a mask as well. He was sort of playing a bit more of a sort of a feral kind of guy. And she sort of comes up to the door and then she slips in through the door and locks it, sort of saying, haha, I got away from you guys, you can't get me kind of thing, right?
Right.
And there's this moment which I loved in the scene where my character, Pip, he lets her know, because there were lines in it, but they were kind of redubbed as sort of weird sort of creature sounds afterwards, into the film itself.
Yeah.
But you had to convey pretty much everything with your body, right?
Yeah.
And the scene where she goes through behind the glass door, and then I run up to the door and pull the door, and it's locked, and I can't get through.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, I've got to somehow let her know that we've got the upper hand still, but also slightly ridicule her, right? Without saying anything. So I remember backing up, sort of twisting my shoulders a bit and sort of pulling up my hand and then sort of pointing like that, unfurling the finger like this.
Yeah.
And then she's like, what? And then I'm sort of like I'm sort of laughing inside kind of thing, but it makes it creepy because there's no sound,
Yeah.
right? And then she turns around, there's another one of my guys behind her inside the room. so it was kind of like that. And I remember coming away from that and thinking, that was fun. That was really creative. It was such a simple thing, but coming up with something for that was super fun. And then fast forward to last year with Hypochondriac, I'd since done some classes with mime, classes with mocap, creature performance, physical performance, with TJ Storm, who played Godzilla and all sorts of crazy, amazing characters, played Darth Vader in the games and all that kind of stuff. And I studied with a mime artist, Lauren Eric Salm, who's one of the last students of Marcel Marceau, the famous French mime.
Yeah.
And yeah, he's a fantastic guy. He's so great. And I saw this come up on Actors Access. So it was an open submission. And I submitted on it and sort of sent my sort of spooky, weird headshot, I think, and a clip from what creature work I did have. I played an alien in a film. And I was driving down to Orange County, and I get a phone call, and it's like, "Hi, my name's Bay. I'm one of the producers of Hypochondriac. You submitted. Are you available?" And I was like, yeah, of course." And they said, "Can we have the director call you? We just want to sort of like, chat with you for a minute." So the director called me, Addison, and then we were chatting, and he was again asking me if I'm available, and I sort of thought, well, it sounds like they're sort of just booking me on it. It's interesting, and I said, "Do you want me to send you a tape, an audition or something?" It was the first time in my career I've ever asked to send a tape in when I've sort of been given the role. It's a very strange experience because it could backfire. I could send the tape in, they're like, "Oh, this sucks. You haven't got the booking now,
Yeah.
But I did it for a reason, because it's such a sort of, I don't want to say ambiguous, but such a sort of different role. And it's very sort of personal to what they're looking for and what the story requires. That me coming in without much knowledge of what it is, I want to sort of prove that, well, not prove, but I want to sort of show them what I can do, so that if they look at it, they go, "Yes, that works," or "No, that doesn't work," or "Can you try this instead?" or, something like that. Because the last thing I want to do is book something and then turn up and then it's like, "Oh, this guy doesn't do anything like what we imagined," And then there's sort of a lot of, upset and disappointment there. So I did this weird video. I think it was like 3 minutes long. And I thought, okay, I know the one thing I do know is the character is fully costumed from head to toe. There's no seeing my eyes. There's no seeing my mouth, my expressions or anything. So what I'll do is I'll grab some random rubber Halloween mask thing that I had, kind of creepy mask. And then I just put some sort of like lighting on and stood back from the camera, did a whole bunch of sort of like weird stuff, like moving around and sort of like trying things with the hand and sort of twitches, sort of movements and stuff. And I sent it back to them. And I didn't hear anything for like the first day, I think it was. And then I thought, uh-oh, it backfired on me. And then they called me back and they says it was the creepiest damn thing they ever saw. They said, "You booked." All right, now I feel like I can do it.
Yeah.
So the next part, sorry, just to mention this, we ended up doing a really fun session in the park with Lauren Eric Salm, the mime teacher, myself, and Addison, the director.
Yeah.
And it was out in daylight with kids running around, picnics, people playing frisbee, and I'm creeping along on the floor on all fours and sort of like, trying all this different stuff. And I'm sure a few people must have looked over and go, "What is going on over there?"
That sounds like so much fun. It's for real. And did you ever think that you would get to that point when you started acting professionally, that you would be involving yourself bodily in trying to portray a creature, for instance? Like, did it ever cross your mind in the beginning?
No, I don't think so. I don't think it crossed my mind then. I mean, I definitely, was always sort of acting out stuff, even though I was never an actor before, when I started in San Diego. But I was always acting stuff out. I remember, like, even as a little kid, when I was like 6 or 7, I have this, I still have it. I have this like fluffy monkey puppet thing. And I used to make my dad laugh. I used to like kind of stretch the arm with the hand out and sort of like dun, 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 dun. Doing the tango and stuff and doing all sorts of like weird things like, "I'm a creature," and all this kind of stuff. And I was always doing crazy stuff like this and making things up. I remember making a puppet of a robot out of egg boxes and toilet roll tubes and things with all the strings in it and stuff, and acting him out. But it was, I think it was sort of a natural thing. And here's the big realization that I had a couple of years ago before the Hypochondriac movie came along, was that I realized that I spent decades creating art for games, and that included animating characters, right?
Yeah.
You take a character like this in a T pose, and then you pose him, and then you animate him, right?
Right.
And I thought, I have a lot of experience with that. Why can't I just animate myself? So that was the connection I made. I thought, okay, combine the games knowledge with the acting, and that's an interesting sort of niche for me, because I think as an actor, I think it's not a bad idea to find something a little bit more unique that you can do that maybe not everyone else can do, right?
Right.
Whether it be
Right.
dance, whether it be mime, whether it be singing, whether it be, sort of contortionism, or all sorts of unusual things, juggling, whatever, right? Something crazy.
Yeah.
Um, like that actor on a police academy. I forget his name now. The one who did this sort of like crazy squeaky sounds and the video game sounds.
Oh,
Remember Police
yeah.
Academy?
I remember
Remember
that.
him?
I don't remember
As
this.
a
Oh,
Yeah, I remember his name. I can't remember his character name in it, but he was great. I remember him being very inspiring, and that's a very niche thing,
right.
to do that. So yeah. So to answer your question, yeah, I didn't expect to do something like that, but I'm so glad I have, and it sort of opened up like this other section of acting. I'm like, I'd like to do more of that. It'd be fun.
That's amazing. Well, I thank you so much for this interview. I really enjoyed talking with you.